Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Julie Maloney, and I am thrilled to welcome you tonight to our In Conversation author series. I am the director of Women Reading Aloud, and Women Reading Aloud has been in existence for almost 20 years. So continuing the conversation is something I absolutely love to do. Tonight, we have a very special evening for you. I'm going to introduce to you Isla Morley, who is coming in from California, from Los Angeles. And let me tell you a little bit about Isla. Isla grew up in South Africa. During the apartheid, she is the child of a British father and a fourth-generation South African mother. By 1994, she was one of the youngest magazine editors in South Africa. But she left her career, her country, and her kin when she married an American and moved to California. Her debut novel, Come Sunday, won the Janet Heidinger Prize for Fiction and was a finalist for the Commonwealth Prize. It has been translated into 7 languages. Her novel, Above, was an Indie Next Pick, a Best Buzz Pick, and a Publisher's Weekly Best New Book. The Last Blue is her 3rd novel. And I just finished reading it for the 3rd time today, I must tell you. And this is how much I love this book. Isla has lived in some of the most culturally diverse places of the world, including Johannesburg, London, and Honolulu. And we're going to talk about the different places that her books take place, the big element of setting that is in all of Isla's books. But for now, let me please welcome and give a hearty, robust welcome to Isla coming in from Los Angeles. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming in, Isla. And I wanted to say that Isla and I met, if you will, via Facebook. Because after I read The Last Blue, which came out at the beginning of the pandemic, I was so absolutely enthralled with this book that I reached out to Isla via Facebook. And I simply said, I love this book. And I think it also does encourage us all that when we read a book, to let the author know that you loved it. And I think that is something we need to do in this world. We need to tell others when something is working. So Isla, thank you so much. And let me ask you now, please tell us how the Blue people from Kentucky got into your mind.
Well, first, let me say thank you so much. I'm very humbled by that introduction and the fact that you did reach out to me and that we had this connection. And I want to thank every one of you. I've got my screen view so I can see all your little blocks and your faces. And it's just very gratifying to see so many people show up for this event. And I know it's all because of Julie, and I'm sure I'm going to be kind of part of your community if you'll have me. Thank you to those who are up in the middle of the night to be with us, and everybody from all over. Just is remarkable, especially in a time of pandemic when we've had to face such isolation. It's really brought home, our mutual values of certainly community and authentic community. So thank you for choosing to spend this time with me and Julie. As to the question of how the Blue people got to me, so I'm sure nobody here procrastinates. I'm the only one, and nobody procrastinates when they're doing editing on their novel, I'm sure. And again, that's my confession. And I was doing revisions on my novel Above, and the internet has just made it too easy to kind of escape some of those drudgery moments of writing. And so I just hopped online and started scrolling my news feed. And, you know, I had like a National Enquirer moment at the checkout stand, you know, where this, it looked like a daguerreotype photograph that had been hand painted. And it was a family portrait of 9 members, and they were all in kind of old-timey clothes. And they were standing in what looked like a hand-constructed cabin in the middle of the woods. The peculiar thing about this particular portrait was that 5 of the family members were bright blue. And I wish I could say that I was intellectually above National Enquirer moments, but, you know, I'm not. And I clicked and you know, I'm the profile for clickbait. There it is. And so it turned out that this led to an article that was written by a woman called Kathy Trust in 1982. She was assigned this story by a now defunct magazine called Science. And so she wrote about this family that lived 200 years ago in kind of the hollows of Eastern Kentucky, in a place called Troublesome Creek. And the progenitor of the Blue people was a man called Martin Fugit. And subsequently, I found that a lot of her details are not factually true, because people have read my book and told me about their connections, their family, their relative. So that's been interesting. But the story that really began was with this imagined character. And that's been the same for each of my books. I wanted to write a story based on what it would be like to be different in that way. And there was a little anecdote, kind of a throwaway comment right near the end of Kathy Trust's article, where she gives an account of this widower, this old man was living in his cabin. He was not being sensible about moving, you know, into town or with his kids. He was just going to stay there. And this was the cabin that he built for his wife who had passed away. And by all accounts, she was the bluest woman that ever lived. Her name was Luna. And he gave this amiable interview with a reporter. And the conversation was going along fine until the reporter brought up Luna's peculiar coloring. And at that point, the man just shut down. And Kathy speculates, you know, was he in denial about his wife's blueness? But I just had this feeling that he didn't want to talk about his wife if coloring was the only thing that people wanted to see. The things that he loved about her, the things that made her unique, the things that made her the same as everybody else, those were his treasures. And that's what he wanted to share. And I knew from that moment that the way to enter the story was through the channel of love.
You bring up so many wonderful themes in this book, and love is one of them. I wonder if you would just read for us the opening paragraph. And the reason I'm asking Isla to read the opening is because there are so many writers here on the screen, and we all know how hard it is to get the opening exactly right, and how hard it is to have the reader turn the page. So could you read the opening, just the opening paragraph? I would love it. Thank you.
35 years ago, Havens would have opened his eyes and thought of the day ahead as lacking. The surprise of old age is how comfortable a person can be with an empty day, how companionable it can be. If anything, Havens wants the day to empty itself even more, allow for memories to pay a visit. And should he decide to spend his time doing nothing more than sitting in his recliner and missing her, what's to stop him?
So you see, it is that opening paragraph, I must say, that made me want to continue to read this book. Sometimes we have to go through, sometimes it could be 100 pages, and yet we hang in there with a book. But for you, for your work, it was one paragraph, and I knew that I wanted to turn that page. I want to go back to your childhood for a moment. And if you would talk about apartheid and how in in some way, how did this influence you, if at all, writing The Last Blue?
Well, let me preface everything I say by saying that I have blind spots that are because of my privilege.
Mhm.
I'm a white woman who was raised in a middle-class family, certainly part of the oppressing class. So I'm always very mindful to, you know, I'm humbled by the subject, because even though I lived there, there's so much I don't know yet. I'll never know and never understand. But having said that, I came of age in the 80s, which is it was the height of apartheid. Before the dismantling started, the National Party was in power as an Afrikaans party. And I think that the pivotal moment for me came in 8th grade, because up until that point, I'd lived in this bubble. My mother sometimes employed a domestic worker who would come and clean our house. And I remember asking as a young child why she couldn't have tea out of our cups. There were enamel cups for her, as there were like enamel plates for her and the gardener. And I remember, finding that peculiar. Also, there was an outdoor toilet. So there were those kinds of things, but, I was so sheltered. But in 8th grade, our family had moved from Johannesburg down to the coastal city of Port Elizabeth. And my mom wanted me to have the best education. And at the time, she thought that St. Dominic's Priory, this Catholic all-girls school, was the right place for me. And it was a very small school. Our entire grade was 30 girls. And we had assigned seating. And the girl who sat in front of me was a Black girl. Up until that point, I'd never gone to school. In South Africa, education was segregated.
Mm.
And there was another Black girl in the class. So Zola was the one who sat in front of me, and it soon became apparent that we both had this mischievous sense of humor. We were chatty, and we formed this, very quick, firm friendship. And we had decided one day that we were going to meet on the weekends, because we were always getting into trouble for talking too much. So I went home and I told my mom the plan was that Zola and I were going to go to the beach together. So, she was to give me a ride. And my mother told me that Zola couldn't go to the beach. The beaches were for whites. And like, how at the age of 13 had that not sunk in? But I couldn't believe that. That just seemed so unjust. And so when I went back to school and I told Zola we were going to have to come up with another plan, and she said, or I said, I can't remember, but we thought, we'd go to the movies. And back to my mother, and she said, no, you can't go to the movies. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, I had never seen Black people at our cinemas. Mm-hmm. And so the next plan we had come up with was to go to the shopping mall together. And my mom said that was out of the question as well, because Black people weren't allowed to go to those shopping malls. And up sprang this indignation, partly because I can't get my own will in this situation, but also because of this unfairness, how could that be? So, that was really the start of my awakening. And then in college, that outrage and sense of unfairness kind of solidified into kind of actionable and intentioned forms of trying to self-educate, but also trying to change the system.
Mhm.
But the university didn't allow for any demonstrations. Politics was banned from our campus.
Mhm.
So there were these, underground meetings. And there was a raw piece of footage. At this time, the country was in a state of emergency. The townships were burning, and it was the time of necklacing. And I don't know if you are familiar with that term, but anybody that was deemed a traitor was captured, and a tire was put around them, and they were doused with gasoline and then set on fire.
Mhm.
And there was this raw piece of footage of this woman who was in that circumstance. And as they set her ablaze, she fell to her knees and she just started to smooth the skirt down so that she would, not, in a manner of dignity, so she could keep herself covered as long as possible. And
Isla, what you're speaking about a scene right now that you're telling us in real life, and I recognize this something very similar in The Last Blue.
that, at the time, I didn't realize the impact that scene would have on me.
Yes.
But it embodied everything that is wrong about prejudice and racism. It embodies everything that's wrong about all kinds of othering we do with one another.
Mm.
And, I'm sure some of you can relate, but we write to make sense of the world. We write to heal ourselves. We write to stretch the boundaries of what we know and stretch the boundaries of our emotional capabilities. We write to become bigger.
Mm.
And I think that scene had to come out. It had to play out. So to get back to your question, I never start out thinking, how can I portray these themes? I'm writing from a place of my own curiosity, my own woundedness. And so then obviously my upbringing, my past sins, the sins of my ancestors are going to come out. They're ghosts that have to be exorcised.
You have in the two of the main characters, Havens and Massey. I would love you to talk a little bit about these characters. Of course, Jubilee and Levi. There's so many characters that stay with me, not only because of their emotional content within this story, but really of how you portray them, because they're, I don't know if you've been told this before, but indeed, I think you have a poet's voice. Do you think of yourself at all as having a poet's voice?
I'm terrible at poems, and but I love poetry so much, and I used to write poetry. The thing about poetry is that's frustrating for me in practice is its brevity. It takes me 375 pages to write what the poet can do in 2 stanzas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Tell us a little bit, if you just, excuse me, just tell us a little bit about giving the career of photography, making one of these characters a photographer. Are you interested in photography yourself?
Yeah, it's that creative eye, right? It's the observer's inmost being. We're observing through our pens, through our notepads, we're observing through the paintbrush and the canvas, and we also observe through actual lenses. And when I was working on the magazine in South Africa, my boss, who was the publisher of both magazines, a men's magazine and a scuba diver magazine, he taught me how to take photographs. And I was fascinated with the whole process of when you want to focus on a subject, it's what do you surround the subject with to tell a more complete subject about that point of focus? What do you leave out? And the fine line between kind of expressing the truth about something and also telling a lie, because with photography, editing is a form of lying, as much as it is a process of bringing a focal point. And I love the complexity of that, and the uncertainty, because it's comfortable for us to want to seek the truth and know the truth.
Do you think it's easier to write the truth in fiction? There's a line that I use so many times.
Absolutely.
So I so many times I use this by Stephen King. He said, in fiction lies the truth. And I know we have memoir writers here. So what do you say to that? Do you think that, you just said, you were very enthusiastic about saying, yes, it's easier to write the truth in fiction. And why do you think that is?
Well, for me, it's easier to write the truth in fiction. Because in a way, I don't have to be that vulnerable. In that, memoirists, I just sit at their feet, because that involves a taking down of all the shields and allowing, the responsive people isn't to the work as it is to the writer of those stories. So I'm just way too thin-skinned to ever put myself out there that directly. But I think facts sometimes get in the way of truth. Facts and statistics are all, fine. They have their place, but I think it's truth with a big T that the artists are after. The small t, we can leave that to, the numbers people and the bean counters, but the poet, the divinity student, the philosopher, the observer trying to get to the heart of beauty, we're after big T truth. And so for me only, fiction is the way to explore that, and getting myself out of the way. I can hide behind the curtain and allow the story to come out and not be so me directed.
I love that answer, because I have to say I agree with you that I think that it is easier to write the truth in fiction. I want to move, though, to something that always intrigues me, because we hear, particularly writers who are coming into the industry as new writers, we may hear a lot about the word talent. But as we all know, a few days ago, Broadway lost a giant. Broadway lost Stephen Sondheim, the great composer and writer. And I was listening to something that he had written to another Broadway writer, musician, composer, Adam Guttell. And when Adam Guttell was maybe 18 years old, he was in touch with Stephen Sondheim. And he was hoping that Stephen Sondheim would give him great praise. And they met in person. And of course, Stephen Sondheim was giving him attention. And he said, this attention is the highest form of encouragement. But he said something else. He wrote a letter to Gittell, and he said to him, and I want to get this exactly right because I love it so much. He said, "You are serious," and he's speaking to this younger generation of composers and lyricists. He said, "You are serious, literate, intelligent, and talented. And talented is the least of them without the other three." And I happen to love this, and I think it's something that we could probably discuss endlessly. If you look at the four elements that he talks about, the idea of being serious and literate, intelligent, and then talented, uh, how do you feel about that? Would you agree? Is there something else that you would add to that in order to be an artist, in order to create?
I think you have to be a seeker.
A seeker. Mhm.
I'd say, about talent, I've got this amethyst crystal sitting next to my desk. My daughter gave that to me, and it's raw, it's unrefined, but it still has these properties. And the refinement of an amethyst crystal into an embellishment that sits on the desk or an ornament on the mantelpiece, and it's still got those qualities about it. So I've chosen to take something raw that I recognize I have a degree of, but mostly what I do is I keep refining that. It's just bloody hard work is what I do. I rewrite so many times. If a line looks effortless on the page, it's because I really, really worked at that. I don't think it has to matter to the individual. So if what you're seeking to do is to refine something in the hopes that it will be published, then I think you have to work hard and you have to be able to sit with all the drudgery of that. But I think too much is being made of achievement. We're just like, we're bombarded from when we're children, to achieve. And to achieve at that level means that we compete with members of our own community. And is it really satisfying? When are we going to be satisfied with the amount of talent that we have, or the amount of intelligence that we have, or the amount of literary ability that we have? When are we going to be satisfied? I have a feeling that if those are the things that we're striving for, and we're looking at others as our competitors that we have to best, we're going to be empty forever.
Do you feel like you're able to then, going back to Sondheim's first thing, being serious, to focus in such a way that you have the extraordinary ability to avoid distraction? Because I hear from so many writers, so many who say, talk about the idea of distraction. There are too many distractions. I will tell you that I had the wonderful experience of just a week ago writing at Edith Wharton's mansion in Lenox, Massachusetts. And I was able to actually write in her bedroom. I did not sleep there. I slept on the landscape, on the estate, actually, in an inn. But I was actually in her bedroom. And I was able to be there all day and write in this room by myself in this amazing mansion. And then I would break for lunch and come back in the afternoon. And I was there with a friend, another novelist, and she was writing in the sewing room. Not that Edith Wharton did her own sewing, I will tell you, but they did have this sewing room in this mansion. And what I I felt was so incredible was to have this time without distraction. So what do you say to writers and readers and other artists who I know are on the screen about how you work without distraction? And would you mention also the closet that you started writing in?
So I wish I had a good answer for that, but I fall prey to distraction.
Mhm.
And the reason it's fun to try and psychoanalyze oneself. And what I've realized that the problem with me and distraction is that I'm avoiding the page. And so I'm circumventing my work. I'm avoiding it, and distraction is a very easy way to do that. And yeah, probably all of us use distraction as a way of avoiding something. And I figured out that what I'm avoiding partly is the fear that when I come to the page and I pick up my pen, today is the day where the well would have run dry.
So you worry about that. You actually worry that the well is going to run dry.
Well, it wasn't a conscious worry. That it came to me after years of figuring out why it takes me so long to start writing every day. And distraction, is that path of avoiding. So it's a scarcity mentality. And for all my optimism and my enthusiasm, positive view of life, and I do subscribe to the theory of abundance, but the small Isla is sometimes just a victim of scarcity mentality. Things are going to run out, and what a devastating day it would be to sit down and discover my story isn't enough, my talent isn't enough, my intelligence isn't enough, my seriousness isn't enough, then I'm not enough.
So how would you feed yourself then?
Resting, not doing. I fed myself through poetry for this book, delving into the seriousness of the themes that I tackle and the seriousness of the stories I tell. Poetry is something, and meditation and prayer to a degree, walks, nature, and anything that, any kind of art activity that can kind of loosen me up is a way of filling me up and kind of grounding me.
There is a love story here, and I say that phrase with the tenderest of feelings, because the way that you have woven this love story is perhaps different than almost any book I've ever read. Because the way the love story evolves, would you tell us about Jubilee, who is one of the last blues, the last blue in this book, of course, and the love story with Havens. And let me say, for some of you who have not gotten to the end of this book, I am not going to spoil it, but the end, the way this ends is extraordinary. And I always do say that I know that I would want a reader to feel so satisfied when the reader comes to the end of a book. And there are times I think that maybe some of us may feel with certain books, we are not completely satisfied. But to experience satisfaction at the end of a book is triumphant. So can you talk a little bit about this love story, and why is love something that you wanted to bring into this book which we might even think of as historical fiction.
So I just quickly want to say something about endings, because we started with beginnings.
Yes.
And my books teach me how to be a writer. And every time I think that I've finished a book and I've learned everything there is to learn about writing, I start a new one and I become a novice all over again. So the thing that is so important, perhaps more important than beginnings, are the endings.
Mm.
And yes, they have to be satisfying. They have to be inevitable. And if they can be surprising, even better. And that takes work. I think that when writers start a project, there's all this revising that happens in the beginning and then towards the middle, but we're always going back and revising, and then we kind of like lose, our batteries run low by the time we get to the middle. And I think that that's why our middles always, get saggy. And I think by the end, when we so often as readers experience books that just kind of fizzle out, or they get wrapped up too quickly, or there's this kind of sudden burst right in the last 20 pages, it's because, dang, we just want to be done with this marathon already. So yeah, I've learned that I need to take time with the endings. But as to the question about love, I like books that make me cry. And I also like books that have taken me on a journey of love. And we're relational people, no matter how old we get, we have, we were formed in love. We're drawn to the idea of love. Most of our closest relationships are about love. So to me, love is the water or the air in which we exist, even if it's the absence of love. So a long time ago, I read a book and I was transported by a love story. And I just wanted to write something of the true nature of love that I've experienced in my life. And I think at the time that I was writing the story, I just discovered my biological family. So I was in my late 40s. I'd never met them. And suddenly I found my tribe. And I was having this experience of falling in love with these strangers who weren't strangers. They were related by blood. And I came home to myself in a way that I hadn't before I'd met these people. And love was that conduit. So yeah, it stands to reason that, that runs through the story beginning to end.
If we go back to your very first novel, and we go to Come Sunday, your debut, which took place, I believe it takes place in Honolulu. And then we have Above, which is in Kansas. And then, of course, Kentucky for The Last Blue. Can you talk about the importance of place? I spoke about this in the beginning, but the importance of place in a book. Because place actually in your books become a character unto themselves, unto itself, really.
Yes, so it's like what you were experiencing when you were sharing with us about writing in that room, I think a setting is definitely a character, and it's kind of like what I was saying with photography. It is the way the principal action becomes heightened. The background has to be as important. So if those Rorschach tests, that's what comes to mind.
Yes.
You see very dramatically the black pattern, but sometimes it's that white space that allows that black ink to really make sense. So, so I think that setting functions in that way as well. The thing with setting is that the tricky thing, especially when I'm not from Kansas and I'm not from Kentucky, and I was very mindful that I was an outsider and I didn't want to fall prey to those stereotypes, which is the shorthand way of just kind of adding that element, is to do all this research and then let all the research come out on the page, and then it becomes, an Audubon paragraph or whatever. So it's the trick to make it, to just kind of imbue that magic that it has. It's another ingredient that is going to just be part of the brew that just rises up off the page and enchants the reader.
You speak about research, and that is something that I wanted to definitely go into, because I know, for instance, I've heard the British author Lisa Jewell, and she speaks about how she does not do research, and that when she comes to a point in her story and she needs to know something, she simply makes a turn in the story, which I actually think is fascinating. And then what you are saying about how there's that fine line between giving the reader too much information, too much research. So when how does this happen? Does it happen on that 4th draft, on that 12th draft? Or how are you, let's talk about your revising. How do you revise and edit your own work?
Every book has been different so far.
Mm-hmm.
I've written 4 books, by the way, 3 are published. The second book is the one that wasn't, and it's my MFA. That's how I've come to look at that failure.
Wait a second. Why do you call that a failure, though?
Well, it's a failure to have been completed in a way that was a satisfying read. And then obviously a failure in terms of not getting published. But it was a success in that it taught me that I couldn't take a formula. I couldn't take my brilliant, shiny idea and just, jam that story around my brilliant idea to just, it was so show-offy. And there are a number of lessons that book taught me. But so with every book, it's different. With Come Sunday, I didn't do any research. I wrote that book with my eyes closed, literally. And I felt like I was just dictating these scenes that just kept dropping into my mind. And would that could be for every single book. I mean, geez, that would make me like this medium, that would be wonderful. Above took some research because I was writing about these engineering marvels that are buried deep in the ground, these Atlas F missile silos, which is the setting for Above, which is really an examination of freedom in this confined space. And so I had to research enough to, be authentic about that. And then the most research I've done was for The Last Blue. And that was just because I nearly didn't write the subject, because there's a conversation about who has the right to tell certain stories that are set in certain places.
Yes.
And so I wanted to educate myself. And I think, that a lot of the research came ahead of time, but not too much. And then it just gets folded in. There's no, it's, I'm not a very good cook, but, I'm one of those cooks that kind of feels and tastes my way into a recipe. Like what I hate going to the store and buying all these finicky ingredients. Those recipes just drive me nuts. They always look lovely on Instagram, but I just don't have the temperament for it. I want to, cook with whatever's in the fridge or in the pantry and create something delicious. So it's a very, very intuitive process. So sometimes I'm adding things right in the beginning. Sometimes I'm only adding salt, like I forgot the salt, okay, it's adding 10 minutes before it's ready to serve. And I think I write like that too. I'm not organized, I'm intuitive. And the wonderful thing about in any artistic expression or endeavor that is primarily powered by intuition is that it keeps you just humble. It's very hard for the ego to take center stage if intuition is there. So it's
I want to remember that. I think that is something that's, I really like that. I mean, say it again. Can you tell us again, about the ego and about how to keep oneself humble?
Life will keep us humble. Suffering will keep us humble. What doesn't keep us humble is looking at what other people are doing. Because the ego gets wounded so quickly and so easily. When you're
looking at your book, when you're working on your book, are you plotting this book? Because you're talking about intuition, and I love how you're using this cooking as an analogy and adding the salt, adding these different ingredients to what it is you're working on. So are you plotting the book? Or is it, are you sitting down every day and seeing what moves you to the page to continue the story forward?
Yeah, again, it's been different for every book. The book where I plotted was that number 2 book that lives in the drawer. And it's taught me that I'm not in a laboratory. I'm not scientific. I'm one of those people. I'm a witch. I brew, and plenty of eye of newt and toe droppings and whatnot. That there's all plenty of that. But there is a systematic approach in my writing as well. So sometimes I'm aware that the scene that I've started to write and the scene that is to follow has this interval, and then I have to try and think, like, how do I bridge that gap in a way that works with the story mechanics? And that requires plotting. And sometimes there's just a nubile scene, and then that needs to get dressed with different layers, and that requires a degree of plotting.
With The Last Blue, if you were to agree that art is a form of teaching, which again is a quote I'm taking from Stephen Sondheim, art is a form of teaching, what is it that you would like the reader to come away with, that perhaps you taught her, you taught him in the most subtlest of ways?
So art is a form of teaching. What comes to my mind, what is applicable in that statement to me, is that I'm the one that's being taught. If my reader feels that they've learned something, then praise be. But that's never my intent. What I hope that the reader experiences in my story is a respite, a journey, a step into an adventure, a quelling of a curiosity, even just companionship on a rainy day when you're on the couch and you don't have the energy for anything else. Those are my lofty ambitions for my book. If somebody feels like it's articulated a truth that they themselves know inside, then how gratifying.
I love how this conversation has moved so quickly into art. I never know where our conversations are going. And for the audience here, certainly Isla had no idea what the questions would be that I would be asking. And I do that on purpose so that we can have this very authentic conversation. So I'm bringing in one more surprise here, another quote by the wonderful Martha Graham, a pioneer from the modern dance world. And because she does speak about the difference between art and the artist. She says, the beauty of your work, along with the beauty of your soul, is all that can protect you from the brutality of the world in which you create your dances, your poems, your stories, your characters. Strive for beauty in words, movements, chords. Strive for beauty in kindness, in patience. The world in which artists live and work is no different from the stock market or a slaughterhouse. But we, the artists, have to be terribly different. We have to be blind to the world and brilliantly alive to the work. Is that last sentence? We have to be blind to the world and brilliantly alive to the work. What's your reaction to that?
I would say that for me, it's the reverse.
Mm-hmm.
To be too self-conscious about the work is, for me, is going to be a trap for the ego.
Mm-hmm.
But to be awake to the world, to be in every moment with all your sensors and receptors as open as possible, not just as an observer, but to also feel, will mean that the work will take care of itself. Just sit down and do it. Yeah, so that's a different experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd make a comment about the slaughterhouse and the brutality that she so eloquently raises. For me, suffering is our teacher. And that beauty is in sharp relief because of the brutality. And to try and avoid brutality is a fool's errand. That we have to find a way to be in the brutality and to be kind of instruments of light. And maybe that's what the work is about, is just if we can portray the brutality, the light will go on in the person who receives it.
I must tell you, when I came across that quote, I had to stop and think about it myself. I had to think about how do we take ourselves out of the world and still create something. And you just answered that so beautifully. And yet I must say that I do understand the other side of the coin, what she's speaking about how, again, it is perhaps going into that cocoon space, so that, again, we go back to the idea of being so focused and so serious and absolutely dive into the work in the deepest way possible. Can you feel, for instance, when you are so deep into, let's say, writing The Last Blue, at the end of a day of a good writing day, do you have this sense of exhilaration? Do you have this sense of exhaustion? What do you feel like at the end of a really fine writing day?
Yeah, there's nothing that beats it. I don't feel cranky when the day has, kind of been a creatively constipated day. I'm not myself.
Are you
But
grumpy? Are you grumpy? I'm grumpy. If I don't have a
yeah,
good day like that, I get grumpy.
yes. Yeah, it just is it just is not satisfying. And but I've learned that you do it whether or not it feels like it's flowing. Obviously, when it's flowing, time stands still. I don't have to get up and have a cookie. I can just be fully immersed and receive and be taken away. So sometimes it's felt like the day has been wasted. And I think that's the heart of this crankiness. It's this feeling like I don't have anything to show for myself. And that's because I'm a product of the society that keeps saying that our worth is measured by what we've produced. And I've learned that tomorrow, those rats droppings on the page are actually something I can work with. I can build a little poo pile that, might be a jumping off point for someone. So, yeah, I think the crankiness comes from this sense that we have to have something to show for ourselves, which is not true.
I want to ask you one more question about Jubilee, who is this certainly one of the strongest protagonists I have ever read. And was Jubilee fully formed in your mind before you went to the page?
Jubilee came into the story about 8 months after I was writing it. Of course, she was there in principle. That's who that's who the story was about. But 8 months into this one afternoon, and I was writing from the point of view of Havens, the photographer who first sees her at a creek bed. This voice came into my head. She just started speaking, and with this accent, and what she had to say was just so compelling. And I remember she was just musing about the color of her skin and the fuss that her skin causes. And she said, if she could just peel off her skin and fold it up, it would be no bigger than a pillow slip. And yet the great big fuss it causes. And that was the very first time I heard her voice. And from that moment, she was very much a fully fledged character, and so the difficulty was trying to discern, do I give her all of the chapters, or I ended up doing an alternating point of view between her, so that we can be inside her and feel what that is like. But also then in the alternating chapters, we get Havens, who is seeing her and loving her from the outside. So we get, those dual perspectives.
I love hearing your thoughts, your ideas about creativity, about this whole process of writing, because I think what you have done for everyone here on the screen is you have torn down that wall that so many writers and readers think that that perhaps we come to the page and everything is fully formed. And you're speaking so honestly about the difficulty that's involved with all of this, but the idea that nothing beats it when you have this wonderful, great day of creating something, and it is quite magnificent. I want you to look ahead 5 years. If you could look ahead 5 years, what is it that you would like to come back here on the screen and hope to tell us about your creative life, your creative life.
Yeah, I would love to tell everyone that it gets easier. That would be wonderful. I have a sneaky suspicion that it's not going to get any easier than it is right now. What I would hope to say in 5 years is that I've become a bigger person, that my loose borders have become even more permeable, that I've absorbed so much more, that I've lived more life so that I could write more true stories.
I'd like to thank you for that. I would like to open this for just a few moments, and you can unmute yourself actually. If someone has a question, would you raise your hand if someone has a question at all here? I do want to give a shout out to Kate from Thunder Road Books in Spring Lake, New Jersey. Kate, could you just raise your hand here? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Julie and Isla, I've been on a few author panels lately. I manage Thunder Road Books now, so it's now my day job. But you ladies are fantastic. This was amazing.
Yes, it was.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I really want to say a few words too about not only Thunder Road Books, which I absolutely adore. This is a new bookstore in Spring Lake, New Jersey, and Kate is the manager. And she is so incredibly supportive of authors. And again, I have to go back to Facebook because I met Kate via Facebook. And I was giving a book talk in New York City, and Kate came from New Jersey to New York City. And this is where we met. So it's, and please, I am really encouraging everyone to support your local independent bookstore.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, Julie is the reason that I'm at Thunder Road Books, because had I not gone to her second author event in Spring Lake, I would have never have met the woman that introduced me to the owner. And I would have never left my teaching career to now run this bookstore. So that's because of Julie.
But you see, I think you're making a point, Kate, that we have to maybe perhaps move out of our cocoons.
It's true. I would have never left school. Never.
And how long were you a teacher, Kate?
12 years. It wasn't that long, but I hadn't just started. I mean, I had started to build a significant career where I was. So, yeah.
So it is moving outside of our cocoons. And so if we go back to the statement, the wonderful quote that's so debatable but exquisite about staying in our worlds and focusing only on the art and separating ourselves from the world. It is I think it's a very provocative question.
Yes.
And absolutely can bring us to beautiful places of discussion. Thank you. Does anyone else have a comment? Eva is up 1 o'clock in the morning here in London. So we have to give her a chance for a question here. Eva.
I interested in the othering. I noticed that Isla grew up in South Africa, and the experience with the separation, with the segregation, with what happens to Black people in America, of course, and what happened to Jewish people in the war. You know, my mother was a Holocaust survivor. She stopped she couldn't go to school. She couldn't run on public transport. Before the horror started, they already were segregated from the others with the Yellow Star. So it is quite powerful. And I was just wondering whether this experience made you write about the othering, whatever you write about, because I noticed that for me, the othering and emigration and things like this is such a powerful thing that now I'm writing a silly book about a wasp turned into a woman. And then I realized it's again about othering and identity. Do you feel that this is something which goes through all your writing, or
Mm.
is it just a
And
part?
this brings us to your other two books as well. So thank you for that question, Ava. Thank you.
Mhm.
Othering was really, you know, that's part of my journey, and it came out most strongly in The Last Blue. It touches on it, actually, it more than touches on it. If we want to see grief and the bereaved as those who become othered when their grief is prolonged, you know, when people grieve for too long and everybody kind of gets annoyed with it and then they kind of are pushed aside, or the othering that takes place when we don't know how to deal with people and their insurmountable grief. So we just send a nice little condolence card and we might call once, but then we kind of, you know, push them aside. So if we look at grief, the bereaved, then Come Sunday in a way is about othering, because this is the story of a woman who has to deal with the most unimaginable grief, and that is the unexpected death of a young child. And she isolates, but her community, her husband, her friends, she feels a sense of abandonment. And even my readers of that book, you know, some of them got fed up with her, because why couldn't she just kind of get over it? I think that there are the obvious forms of othering that are so pervasive that we do, but then there are all kinds of subtle ways that we do that. So it probably is in all of my books, because at heart, what I want is for us to see how much we have in common, and to hold hands, to link arms. And suffering is the great thing that can bring us all together. And so I was always of this kind of naive belief that if we had this mutual enemy, like if aliens were to arrive and threaten our planet, that we would all very quickly realize that we're all one family. But then the alien came in this like little microscopic form, and what do you know? We have found ways to other each other. So
Yeah.
You know, I would just
cooperate with the enemy, of course. So that's another thing. When people react, the invasion, they might be people who would collaborate with the invaders.
I want to thank you so much for coming in tonight to us. And for those of you who have not read The Last Blue or Above or Come Sunday, please go and look for Isla's books. And again, The Last Blue came out at the beginning of the pandemic, which of course, as we all know, shut down any kind of book tour or appearance. So being able to bring Isla here, I just am so grateful. I am so grateful. And I really feel this conversation has gone to a very, very special place. It's not the kind of, you know, I'm never really interested in the kind of conversation that says, what time in the morning do you write? You know, I'm interested in what's behind the skin and close to the bone of the author. And thank you for giving us that tonight, Isla. Thank you, thank you. And thank you to everyone for taking time of your busy lives, for taking time out of your lives to listen to a conversation that I feel we need to get back to the art of conversation. And so please read The Last Blue.
Yeah.
And Isla, thank you, thank you, thank you. And please just stay on, Isla, for a moment. And to all of you in the audience, my gratitude for coming and for being in this community. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
It was
Good night.
wonderful. That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Isla, if you tour, you have to come tour in New Jersey.
Thank you.
There, I'm there.
That's right.
We're ready. We're ready to get back to some in-person author events. So
Okay, yes.
have a
I
good
was,
night.
I was telling Julie that I've got a sister in Manhattan, and so that's on the cards. I'm going to hit you up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to host you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, Kate.
Bye.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, Eva. Good night.
Good night. It was wonderful. It was well worth staying up. It's cool. It's only 10 minutes past 1, actually. It's not that terrible. And it was lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here, Eva.
Thank you. You can just hit end the meeting and then you'll be gone. And you can go to bed. Isla, thank you so much. Thank you.
So much. Thank you. That was